I used to think love was something you could build if you just worked hard enough. That if you kept smiling, cooking the right meals, saying the right things, it would last. I was wrong. Because sometimes you can build a perfect home and still feel like a stranger inside it. When I first met Mark, he wasn't just a man I loved. He was everything I thought I'd been waiting for. We were both in our mid-30s, working long hours at the same architecture firm in Chicago. He was the quiet kind, calm in chaos, precise in everything he did. The kind of man who made you feel safe just by existing near you. And I was the opposite. Loud when I laughed, impulsive when I wanted something, emotional to a fault. Maybe that's what drew him in. Maybe he liked how I filled the silence he carried. When we married, everyone called us the perfect match. We had a small wedding, just family and a few close friends. I remember the way he looked at me that day, like I was the only person in the world. That gaze, it still haunts me sometimes, especially now when I know how much I broke it. After our marriage, I left my job. Mark wanted to keep working, and honestly, I was tired of the long hours, the deadlines, the pressure. He didn't force me. I told myself it was my choice. I'll take care of the home, I said, and you take care of everything else. At first, it was beautiful. Our little house near Lincoln Park smelled of new paint and lemon polish. Every morning, I'd make him breakfast, kiss him goodbye, and wait for him to come home. I wanted to be that perfect wife. But perfection gets lonely. Mark would come home exhausted. He'd eat, ask about my day, smile politely, and then drift to his laptop again. At first, I told myself it was temporary. He's working hard for us. But months went by, then years, and that temporary became routine. I used to hum while I cooked, but slowly the house fell quiet. The thing about silence is it starts to echo. I began to feel invisible. I'd spend hours planning small surprises, his favorite dinner, a new dress, little notes in his lunchbox. He'd smile, thank me, and go back to work. I wasn't angry, not at first. Just empty. He was physically there, but emotionally miles away. The nights were the hardest. I'd turn toward him in bed, but he'd already be asleep, or pretending to be. And I'd lie there wondering when our marriage turned from love into habit. Then came Jack. He was a project manager from a partner firm. I met him at a networking event I attended with Mark. The irony still hurts. Jack wasn't even my type. He was confident, funny in a careless way, the kind of man who made everyone around him feel seen. I hadn't felt seen in a long time. At first, it was harmless. Just conversations, late-night texts about movies, work gossip, random memes. I told myself it was friendship. I even mentioned him to Mark once. He didn't even look up from his laptop, just nodded and said, "That's nice." That's nice was the sound of my heart cracking. One night, I got a message from Jack. "If your husband keeps ignoring you, I might just steal you." I should have laughed it off. Instead, I typed back, "You have to try harder than that." That was the beginning of my mistake. It didn't happen fast. It was slow, calculated, dangerous. Like standing too close to the edge of a cliff, convincing yourself you won't fall. Lunches became dinners. Dinners became hotel rooms. And somewhere in between, guilt stopped feeling heavy. It started feeling addictive. Jack made me feel alive again. He'd look at me like I was something precious, not someone predictable. He remembered details Mark never did. My favorite wine, the scar on my left wrist from when I was 12, the way I always tucked my hair behind my ear when I lied. And yes, I lied a lot. I lied about everything. About where I was, who I was with, even about trying for a baby. Mark wanted a child, and I said I was trying. I even pretended to be disappointed every month it didn't happen. The truth? I was terrified. I couldn't bring a baby into a marriage that already felt dead. But I didn't have the courage to say that out loud. So I hid behind excuses. Sometimes, when I'd look at Mark, sitting at his desk, working late, his face illuminated by the screen's glow, I'd feel something between love and pity. He trusted me so completely, and I used that trust as a shield to hide my sins. I told myself I deserved this affair, that I had sacrificed enough, loved enough, waited enough. But deep down, I knew I was just running away from my own emptiness. The guilt came in waves. I'd come home from seeing Jack, and Mark would be in the kitchen reheating dinner for us both. He'd kiss my forehead, and I'd have to stop myself from flinching. I started showering twice before bed, once for Jack, once for Mark, as if the water could wash off the betrayal. But guilt fades too, especially when you're being adored somewhere else. And Jack adored me, or at least he said he did. He told me I deserved better, that Mark didn't appreciate me, that he'd leave his wife someday. And I believed him. I believed every lie because it made me feel less like a villain and more like a victim. One night, while lying in Jack's arms, he said, "If it were up to me, you'd never go back home." And I almost didn't. But then he rolled over and fell asleep, and I stared at the ceiling, realizing that for him, this was excitement. For me, it had become a prison. I was trapped between two lives, one that was numb and one that was wrong. And both were suffocating me. Still, I didn't stop. Because once you start living a lie, stopping feels harder than breathing. I became careful, too careful. New passwords, new lingerie, even a second phone. I thought I was smart, thought I could manage it all. I had forgotten that the truth doesn't need eyes. It finds you anyway. The first time I noticed Mark acting distant, I thought maybe he finally suspected something. But he didn't confront me. He smiled, kissed me goodbye, and told me to enjoy my girls' trip that weekend. That trip wasn't with my friends, of course. It was with Jack, a spa weekend getaway to celebrate what he called our anniversary. 1 year of lies, 1 year of stolen moments. And as I packed my suitcase that morning, I didn't know it yet, but that weekend was the beginning of the end. The point where every lie I told started to collapse on top of me. That weekend was supposed to be perfect. A quiet spa resort outside the city, champagne waiting in our room, and Jack, the man who said he loved me more than anyone ever could. I told Mark I was visiting my college friend, Camille, for a few days. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Have fun, you deserve it." It should have made me happy. But that smile, it didn't look like his usual one. It looked heavy, like he already knew something I didn't. I pushed the thought away and left before sunrise, suitcase in hand, heart pounding with excitement and fear. On the drive there, Jack kept teasing me about how he couldn't wait to finally have me without secrets. I laughed, pretending it was romantic. But in the back of my mind, something kept whispering, what if Mark finds out? At the resort, everything was perfect at first. We spent hours by the pool, laughing, drinking, pretending we were a real couple. For a moment, I almost forgot that I wasn't supposed to be there, that every message, every kiss, every touch was built on betrayal. That night, as we sat on the balcony under string lights, Jack raised a glass. 1 year, he said, smiling. 1 year of you making my life worth living. I smiled back, but inside, I felt something shift. 1 year. That meant for 12 months, I had lied to my husband, the man who still texted me goodnight every evening. Later, when I went to the bathroom, I checked my phone. There was a message from Mark. Hope you're having fun with Camille. Don't forget to eat. Just 10 words. Simple. Ordinary. But it made my chest ache. I replied quickly. Thanks, love. Camille says hi. He sent a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No question, no suspicion. Just quiet acceptance. And somehow, that hurt more than anger ever could. The next morning, my credit card stopped working. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe a network issue. But when I texted Mark about it, his reply froze me. It's not working because I disabled it. Ask your boyfriend to pay for it. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. My first instinct wasn't guilt, it was fear. He knew. Somehow he knew. Jack was still asleep when I sat on the edge of the bed, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I reread the message again and again, hoping it was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but what it really was. Then another message came. I've seen everything. Enjoy your last night. That was when my world started to crumble. I dropped my phone. My throat felt tight. My stomach twisted. Jack stirred, asking what was wrong. I lied, of course I did. I said, "Work issue. Nothing important." But the way my hands shook gave me away. All day, I kept checking my phone, waiting for Mark to text again, to call, to scream. But nothing came. Just silence. That silence was worse than any fight we could have had. By the time I got home 2 days later, I could tell something had changed. The house felt hollow. Too clean. Too still. His car was gone. The drawers in his side of the closet were empty. On the dining table, there was an envelope. Inside were divorce papers and photos. Photos of me and Jack. At restaurants. In hotel rooms. At that spa. There were screenshots too, our texts, my lies, proof of every secret I thought I'd buried. At the bottom, a note in Mark's handwriting. "I'm not the fool you thought I was. Mark." I couldn't breathe. My knees gave out. I sat on the floor surrounded by the wreckage of my own choices. I tried calling him 10 times, maybe more. He didn't answer. When he finally picked up later that evening, I barely recognized his voice. It was calm, too calm. "Mark, please can we talk?" I whispered. He didn't respond. "Please, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to." "You lied to me for over a year," he said, his tone flat. "You slept in my bed while loving someone else. Don't you dare tell me this was a mistake." I started crying. Not the kind of crying that fixes anything, the kind that makes you realize it's already over. He hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in that house felt like him, like the ghost of the man I destroyed. Days passed, but the silence stayed. My messages turned from apologetic to desperate. "Can we talk? You don't understand. It wasn't real with Jack, I swear." No reply. Then, one morning I got a message from Jack. "Evelyn found out. She left with the kids. Don't contact me again." That was it. No goodbye, no apology. Just a single text that ended everything. He was gone. Mark was gone. And I had nowhere left to go. I called Mark again just to hear his voice, maybe to beg. He didn't answer. When I tried one last time, he picked up and I heard his breathing on the other side. "Please," I whispered. "I know I hurt you, but I still love you." He laughed. A low, bitter laugh that broke something inside me. "You love me," he said. "The way a thief loves what they steal? You love the comfort I gave you while you planned your escape? Mark, I never wanted this. I just felt alone. You were always so distant and I—" "Stop," he interrupted sharply. "You don't get to justify it. You built a life around lies. You made me believe we were trying for a child while you were sleeping with someone else." I couldn't say anything. He was right. I'd run out of excuses. He hung up again, and this time, I didn't call back. That same day, I went to see him. I had to. I didn't even know where he was living, but after hours of searching, I found his new address through an old delivery account we once shared. When he opened the door, he looked different, calmer, colder. He didn't even seem angry anymore. Just done. "Please, Mark," I said, voice trembling. "Don't shut me out like this." He didn't move. Didn't speak. Jack's wife found out. I continued quickly, hoping for sympathy. She posted everything. "I lost my job. He's gone. Everyone hates me. I ruined everything. Please, can we just—" He cut me off. "You didn't ruin everything, Charlotte. You ruined me." That line hit harder than any slap. He handed me a manila envelope, another one. Inside were legal documents. He was suing me for emotional distress, backed by witness statements and financial records showing I used his money for those trips. I remember my hands shaking as I read them. "You planned all of this?" I stammered. He looked straight at me. "No, Charlotte. You did." For the first time in my life, I had nothing left to say. He walked past me, his expression unreadable, and said quietly, "You wanted freedom. Now you have it. Go." And I did. I walked out of that apartment into the freezing night, realizing that everything I'd traded love for, excitement, attention, validation, had vanished. All that was left was me, and the unbearable silence I'd created. That night, I sat in my car outside the building for almost an hour, staring at the windows, hoping he'd look out. He never did. When I finally drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, mascara streaked, eyes swollen, face pale. For the first time in a long time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. And somewhere deep down, I knew the punishment hadn't even begun yet. When everything broke, I imagined the worst parts, the fights, the humiliation, the cold silence. I did not imagine how quiet it would get. Not the noisy, obvious quiet of a slammed door, but the quiet that sits in a room after the guests leave and you turn off the lights, a silence heavy enough to press your lungs inward. The first week after Mark left was chaos in an odd, bureaucratic way. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Messages that began with "Are you Charlotte Reed?" and ended with stinging accusations. Emails from HR with subject lines like "Urgent," "Company Statement Request." Screenshots of conversations I had meant to keep private. People I thought were friends sending me articles and asking if it was true. The architecture firm where I had worked for years, the one place I had told myself I could always return to, sent a terse message. Given the situation, we recommend you take a leave of absence while matters are resolved. They didn't fire me outright. That would have been clean. Instead, they put distance between my name and the firm, like an infection that might spread. I could understand the legal logic. A firm has a reputation to protect, but that didn't make the phone calls and pointed texts any easier to swallow. Then there was social media. Evelyn, Chase's wife, did what she needed to do: protect her children. She posted screenshots with context and the internet did the rest. Within 24 hours, my face, my private moments, lived on feeds and comment threads. Strangers offered me pity. Strangers offered me judgment. Someone sent a private message with a single word: deserved. It would have been easier to be angry at strangers, but their words slid off like water. The people who hurt were the ones who had once carried me to the hospital when I broke my arm as a child, the neighbors who borrowed sugar, the family members who'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries with us. They called, then stopped calling. Texts unread. Invitations that were suddenly already taken. My parents called once. They wanted to know what had happened. I heard disappointment in their voice, not the easy, shockless disappointment of someone who disapproves because society says so, but the personal, private kind. "We raised you better than this," my father said, and I heard the pain in his tone. My mother sounded as if she wanted to cry, but feared she'd be punished for it. I told them I was sorry. I told them things that hid the truth and revealed it in equal parts. I told them I'd made mistakes. They told me to come home. I didn't go. The legal side, Mark's filings, took on a life of their own. He had been meticulous. The photos, the receipts, the timelines, everything I'd thought private suddenly had legal weight. My access to joint accounts was cut. An injunction kept me from entering the condo we had shared. I moved into a small sublet above a laundromat, my life condensed into a few boxes and a suitcase. Sleep came in fits and patches. I learned the precise, humbling choreography of living on the edge of someone else's world. But the worst part was not the legal papers or the loss of friends. It was the way I had to confront myself every morning when I brushed my teeth and saw the tired woman in the mirror. There were no upbeat messages from Jack. No secret texts that made me feel seen. The man who had made the affair feel like salvation was gone, and his absence felt less like sorrow than it did like a mirror reflecting what I had always been avoiding, a woman who had made a string of selfish choices and then demanded mercy. I considered, a lot, why I did it. The easy version of the story is that I was lonely and Jack swooped in with flattery. The harder version is that I kept choosing the flattery because it gave me something I had stopped getting at home, attention that did not come with spreadsheets and late-night calls. I wanted to feel young and desired. I didn't want to ask Mark for the kind of conversations that might have saved us because I was afraid of being rejected, of hearing that the love I remembered was gone. People always ask whether you regret the moment you first crossed the line. For me, the regret came later, layered and persistent. The first time I cheated, I felt alive. The day I lost everything, I felt the full weight of the consequences. Regret is not a single emotion, it's a crowd, jostling and clamoring until you can't hear your own heartbeat. Sometimes the humiliation was practical. The bank called because a payment bounced. The landlord wanted the deposit. My phone buzzed with news articles and DMs. I found myself fielding attorneys' calls from Mark's counsel and trying to salvage whatever dignity I could bargain for. I paid for a lawyer, an exhausted woman who told me plainly that the record was not in my favor. She offered options: contest, negotiate, or accept the terms. Pride kept me fighting for a few weeks. Pride is a dangerous, expensive thing. There were people who tried to help in ways that surprised me. Evelyn, his wife, sent one message months after everything exploded. It arrived in the middle of the night with no context, just a short paragraph. "I hope you get help." It was not gloating. It wasn't a victory lap. She had her reasons for doing what she did, but the message read like a small, private plea, a hand extended across a ravaged landscape. I didn't reply. I wanted to think of it as closure for both of us, but hearing it felt like more proof that my actions had real effects beyond my vanity. Therapy began as a way to look good on paper for the mediator. "See a counselor and come back with documentation," my lawyer advised. I went because I had to, but then I kept going, because in the room with a woman who listened and asked non-judgmental questions, I started to unspool. She made me say things I didn't want to say aloud, that I had been scared of commitment, that I had equated attention with worth, that I had been selfish. Sometimes the admissions tasted like poison in my mouth, but they were necessary. Slowly, the shape of accountability formed. It wasn't heroic. There were no grand gestures, no public apologies that made headlines. If people wanted to see repentance, they could look at the small, humiliating steps, the texts I stopped sending to strangers, the job applications I filled out at odd hours, the support group I attended for people who had cheated or been cheated on unexpectedly. It wasn't a clean process. Recovery rarely is. Work came back slowly. Not to my old firm, at first. A small design studio offered me freelance work, minor projects, but they paid, and they needed someone who understood structure. The first check I received after everything was a small, functional thing, enough to pay rent and buy groceries. I cried when I cashed it. There was something so ordinary and yet so sacred about being paid for honest labor after a season of deceit. Family dynamics adjusted at the edges. My parents visited once, then stopped. My brother called more often but kept his distance. Friends I thought would be anchors turned into weather vanes, changing direction when the wind shifted. One former friend sent a message calling me selfish. Another showed up with a casserole and did not talk about the scandal at all, only about the recipe. Those gestures taught me something about who loved me for myself and who loved me for the version that looked good in public. There were nights I wanted to disappear. There were nights I wanted to stand outside Mark's apartment and scream at him to come back. There were also nights I dreamed of Jack, not of him lovingly holding me, but simply of the sensation of being longed for. When I woke, the dreams felt like traps. They convinced me that nostalgia was truth. I had to teach myself the difference. Memory can be a liar if you let it be. The mediation dragged on. Mark's attorney stood on facts and timelines like a surgeon placing clamps. My lawyer argued for leniency, for a split that recognized that life is complicated and people make mistakes. At the mediation table, looking at the man who had once been my safe harbor, I felt a curious compassion. I had hurt him in ways that would not be erased by time or payment. I asked for forgiveness in a mannerly, desperate way. He said nothing for a long time, and then he said, "I don't want to be your lesson plan." The sentence cut through me because it was simpler and truer than any accusation. In the legal settlement, I walked away with nothing more than a few keepsakes and an agreement to reimburse certain expenses. No alimony, no shared assets. The condo stayed with him. He had planned carefully, something I had once admired and now resented. Yet there was relief in the finality. You can rebuild from a foundation you own. You cannot rebuild from a house of secrets. Months passed and the online fury cooled, as it inevitably does. The comments slowed, the articles aged, and other scandals took the spotlight. People move on because they must. Public outrage is a commodity with a short shelf life. But private consequences lingered, repairing trust in family, building a new professional reputation, learning to be alone without the white noise of someone waiting in the wings. One morning, about 6 months later, I walked past a small cafe near the studio where I now consulted. Through the window, I saw Mark sitting with a man who was probably one of his new friends, laughing at something ordinary. He looked lighter. At that moment, I felt two things at once, a stab of regret and an odd flicker of something softer, relief for him. For a long time, my selfishness had acted like a shadow between him and the world. Watching him breathe seemed like restitution I could not earn. It felt like the last, quiet mercy of a life we had once shared. I do not know what will come next. I know I will keep waking and practicing small acts of honesty. I will keep reporting to therapy and showing up for work. I will watch my name fade into routines that do not revolve around dramatic headlines. I will try, clumsily and patiently, to become someone who can be trusted. Sometimes I imagine running into Jack again. I hope not. If I saw him, I suspect I would feel nothing but the hollowed gratitude for a lesson learned the hardest way possible. I would probably say, "Thank you," because the pain taught me something I would never have accepted without it. To people who have read these words and feel a familiar ache, I will not defend what I did. I will say I am sorry, and then I will show it in the tedious, unglamorous work of becoming better. Repentance is not a speech. It is a series of days lived differently. Outside my window, the city hums, cars, a delivery truck, someone calling a dog. Life moves on, and maybe so will I, a little wiser and a little less blind.